Looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion. There's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy from Trump's Fare Thee Well yesterday. He had this to say about America's standing in the world.
We restored American strength at home and American leadership abroad. The world respects us again. Please don't lose that respect.
Please don't lose that respect. And, of course, this was attendant to his thanks to military, to law enforcement around the country, and also on the way out the door, the administration, that is. Mike Pompeo's op-ed in the Wall Street Journal and the designation of China as a state that has committed genocide against Uyghur Muslims. I like that. I like what Trump did. I also like the ban on the importation of products produced by slave labor, the million-plus Uyghurs that are in concentration camps, essentially, in China, as we understand it, because it boxes China in a little bit, or boxes the Biden administration in with respect to China, considering the Biden family seems to be fairly cozy with the Chinese communists. Now that it's been designated as a state that's committed genocide and continues to enslave a minority population there, maybe, hopefully, at least some in the press corps would be asking the Biden administration the appropriate questions if they were to soften the U.S.'s stance with respect to China. For more on all of this, including the security preparations for the inauguration today, we're pleased to be joined by Cory Mills, U.S. Army combat veteran, founder and CEO of PACEM Solutions International and PACEM Defense LLC. Cory, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, Amy, thanks for having me back.
Well, let's start with that last topic, the brouhaha over the National Guardsmen, the vetting of National Guardsmen securing the Capitol for Joe Biden's inauguration today. You had Tennessee Congressman Stephen Finger-Lickin' Cohen say he's worried about the National Guard, worried about a fifth column action against the incoming president because, you know, a big percentage of National Guardsmen are white and probably Trump voters. And who knows what a white Trump voting National Guardsman might do. And so there have been 12 of the some 25,000 deployed to the U.S. Capitol that have been sent home for things like social media posts and so forth, it's reported. But what is your assessment of just sort of the characterization of National Guardsmen, the vetting, the suggestion that much like we saw, like we're hearing about the Capitol Police, that law enforcement and the military really is the problem in some respects here?
Well, Dan, again, this is one of those things that's just so absurd to even think about. Being a U.S. military veteran myself, currently a DoD advisor appointee, I can tell you right now that the professionalism that our U.S. military and our armed forces has is paramount to none. It's absurd for me to think that, oh, well, like Cohen said, because they're a white, National Guardsman and they're male, that automatically means that they're a Trump supporter and therefore they're a threat. Again, this is Democrats utilizing identity politics. It's all about what you look like and which gender you represent, not about the meritocracy of how you actually fulfill your obligations. The other thing that was very interesting is Major General Walker, who is the D.C. National Guard commander, talked about this vetting process. I'm very familiar with the FBI doing a vetting process for certain special events. When I was in Afghanistan and Iraq, I took part in helping to support different types of diplomatic and CODEL operations. With that, we would take an additional review or vetting of whichever agency we are supporting at the time, and then they would give you a temporary credential that was based on that certain operation or that certain event. So this isn't something that is just unique to this certain situation. This is something that I had when I supported the DEA in the past. This is something I had when I supported the Secret Service, when Joe Biden, for example, came to northern Iraq. So these are things that are very common. And I think that even just the hint that this means that they're doing this because, you know, the National Guard are risk, or what Cohen said, which was absolutely disgusting. You know, again, it's just an attack on our military, our law enforcement, the defund the police stance. I mean, it just hasn't stopped, and that's just the bottom line.
Well, when you were being vetted, did they ask you who you voted for, and do you think it's appropriate for them to check your text messages and social media, or is that part of the
Absolutely
deal?
not. No, absolutely not. Again, when we went through this type of vetting, it was more looking at the things that matter, like who's your foreign contacts, where have you traveled over the last couple of months, are you able to be manipulated, are you in any type of financial, you know, struggle that would allow you to be compromised in some way, which would be the case with Joe Biden. You know, again, it's just one of those things where we're starting to see a direct attack against conservatives, whether it's with big tech, whether it's with elected officials. You know, the very same people who scream suppression, who scream they've been oppressed throughout the last couple of years, who are elected officials making only $175,000 but cashing out millions of dollars somehow. These are the same people who are now doing that and directing this type of angst against conservatives and against people. And you know, it's funny, in the military, I can remember 20 years ago, they had a don't ask, don't tell policy. And what this basically meant is that it wasn't that you couldn't be a homosexual male, or you couldn't be a lesbian or anything like this. It was simply, hey, we just can't ask you about it because it's a personal question. Well, now they can ask you who you vote for, what your political affiliation is. You know, there's no ban when it comes to, you know, targeting their opposition.
So
You know, I find that to be absurd.
I just want to understand your position. Are you saying, just so I have this straight, are you saying that a National Guardsman or a member of the U.S. Army who votes Democrat will also protect Republicans, and somebody who votes Republican would also protect Democrats if that's their sworn duty? Is that your position?
I know how shocking this is.
That
I
is
don't
wild.
want to make this a jaw dropper, but we have this thing. It's called an oath, and we swear to actually protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. This is a new revelation for many Democrats who haven't read their Constitution. But I served under both a Democratic administration and a Republican administration when I was in the military. If my commander-in-chief would have designated that I needed to go out and do something on the nation's behalf, guess what? I'm in uniform. I swore an oath. I'm here to serve my nation's purpose. So as surprising as that is, the same types of oath that our law enforcement takes and, you know, carries out, you know, their bravery every single day to try and protect our communities, the same as our U.S. military. And the fact is that it's only the Democrats who continue to question and who continue to try and attack the people who actually preserve and protect our nation.
Yeah, you made an interesting point when you're talking about presidential visit in a theater of battle, for example, where troops are deployed. So what is the standard that has been set now with what has transpired in preparation for today's inauguration? So when President Biden goes to visit troops wherever they may be deployed around the country, around the world, I should say, are those troops that will be on site when the president visits, are they going to be allowed to be in the presence of the president of the United States based on whether or not they vote for his party, whether or not they have said anything on text messages or in social media that may stand in opposition to the stated policy or behavior of the President of the United States? Is that the standard we're setting?
I think that we're setting a lot of very poor precedents. I think that was starting to be set even back when President Obama was in. You look at his Secret Service detail. I had a friend of mine who was on that detail, and he explained to me that Obama had specified there must be a certain amount of, you know, people of color, there must be a certain amount of females, and one of the females that was actually on the details, I was told, didn't even pass the qualification on one of her weapon systems, and they gave her a retry just so they could ensure that they had the right gender color mix. Now, this was already occurring back then. You think about what's happening right now, where, you know, you have the radical left who's telling this, you know, the incoming, you know, to-be president that you need more people of color in your cabinet, you need more women of color in your cabinet, you need, more diversity in your cabinet. It's no longer about meritocracy. And you think that this isn't going to be able to start seeing a spillover? Of course it is.
Now, Governor Abbott from Texas called this vetting very disrespectful, and he said never again is he going to send troops to Washington D.C. because there's 1,000 that he sent, and he regrets that. Do you think other governors will follow along?
Absolutely. Whenever you start going forward and you start judging people and you start looking at, I mean, I would not be surprised at all if after they've asked what their political affiliation is, that determines, what concentric ring of security you're allowed to be in. I mean, this is the problem, is that the same people who claim to be, so racially divided and so oppressed. I mean, you got Ilhan Omar and Ayanna Pressley and AOC and all of these, Democratic elected officials who try to claim that color and race has something to do with it. I mean, look what they said about the Capitol Hill, riot that basically went forward. They said, oh, we all know if it was people of color who would have done that, what would have occurred. The DOJ is prosecuting people left and right now. They're doing biometric scans to try and find every single individual to include and hold your hat now, a white Caucasian male who is just brought up on charges for basically going inside. But they immediately want to turn every single issue into identity politics because it's the one issue that they can go ahead and try and divide us further from. So what's going on right now in our country is disgusting. We had the Emancipation Proclamation back in 1863, and we're still fighting the exact same fight, and they're still utilizing that exact same excuse to try and buy and steal votes.
I wanted to get your reaction to an aspect of the conversation with respect to big tech. This is raised by Eric Felton in a very good piece over at RealClearInvestigations.com. He asks, will tech's woke force be with us if we go to war? And he reminds us that Google was partnering with the Pentagon back in a couple of years ago in a project called Project Maven to identify drone targets. The software well underway when in 2018, thousands of Google workers protested their company becoming a defense contractor. And so they got out of that business. Google has also stepped back from high-profile military projects, absent from the scramble among firms, including Amazon, Microsoft, and Oracle, to win the contract for the Pentagon's Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure, which is a 10-year deal providing cloud computing to the Department of Defense. It's worth billions of dollars. Microsoft is pursuing it over the objections of its workers. And one wonders, I don't want to extrapolate too far from Parler, but if there's enough pressure internally from the woke forces of these big tech companies, whether it is to provide services to the Pentagon, Department of Defense, or it's to continue providing services to assist the American government with our national security, that they may not be on our side. Is that something that's talked about in military circles? Is that a concern, and thinking about a contingency planning for these sorts of needs at the federal level?
Well, big tech and I would say majority of those who are trying to censor one side or the other is certainly a concern. There's a lot of my guys that I served with and a couple who have retired recently who talked about the fact that they were happy to be getting out when they are. Look, I mean, they're obviously not worried about losing money or losing programs. I mean, we watched Twitter drop $51 billion, and they haven't batted an eye about it. They can ban President Trump, but yet Ayatollah Khomeini and Javad Zarif, the Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs, who said we will eradicate Israel, are completely fine to go ahead and tweet. Loretta Lynch, there should be blood in the streets. Her account is just fine. They're not inciting violence. There's certainly censorship targeting of the opposition, which is exceptionally un-American and unconstitutional, but they're protected by these Section 230 rights, which essentially provides them absolute immunity from anyone to even try and threaten or sue for discrimination or for other areas. When it comes to the DOD, I would be completely fine for the Department of Defense, as well as for many other government agencies, to centralize how we actually do a majority of our programming and where we actually censor and store. I mean, if you think about the recent hack, that was as a result of one of these outside subcontracts being hacked during an actual update. So is it a concern? Absolutely. Should the American people be concerned regardless of who you voted for, left or right? Absolutely. At any point in time, we start to suppress one side of the message, then that right there guarantees that they try and drive an agenda just so the American people would be forced into one frame of thought, and that's very dangerous for our country.
Yeah, and I just think companies that are beholden to cultural Marxists in their ranks and will choose them over commitments, whether contractual or sort of in principle, to the preservation of this republic. It's that seems to me a pretty important topic of conversation. He is Cory Mills, U.S. Army combat veteran, founder and CEO of PACEM Solutions International and PACEM Defense LLC. Cory, thanks for being with us again. Appreciate it.
Dan, Amy, appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs. Joe Biden takes the helm at the White House today. Treasury nominee Janet Yellen pushing for a quick stimulus vote, and Canada hopes to save the XL pipeline. Those stories next. You've all probably heard of asbestos and know that it's dangerous. Most mesothelioma diagnoses are thought to be related to asbestos exposure. People who were exposed to asbestos decades ago are being diagnosed to this day with mesothelioma. That's because it can take as many as 30 or even 50 years to develop. But did you also know there is money to pay victims of asbestos exposure from years ago? An estimated $30 billion is available to help compensate victims and their families. If you or a member of your family have been diagnosed with mesothelioma, you may be able to receive some of this money without ever going to court or filing a lawsuit. Get a free legal review today. Call Sokolov Law at 1-800-910-1950